This is Fergus. Fergus is a Cairn Terrier. I drew him using chalk pastel pencils, and I'm going to paint him using Winsor & Newton Artisan water-soluble oil paints. I'm going to start out with a mixing white, and I'm going to add that mixing white to this Naples yellow for the basic color. I'm not going to mix it on the palette, but just as I paint. And I'm using a bristle brush with a kind of long handle. The bristle brush allows me to get strokes that you can see. It's called impasto, when the fur strokes look a little bit 3D and catch the light and shadow. And I want that because I want Fergus's fur to look realistic. So I'm following the way the fur grows, as if I were brushing Fergus's hair. I'm using a little more of the Naples yellow and less of the white when I get to the areas that are going to end up being a little darker. And I'm leaving some of the shadowed areas because I'm going to be using another color for that. This is burnt umber. When you do oil paints, it's good to go from dark to light. So now that I have my basic color down, I'm going to start with the darks and put in those dark shadow areas that are underneath him, of course, where his cast shadow is, but also on his body, underneath all the hair, fur. There are dark shadowed areas, and that's what gives the fur the texture that you can see. Otherwise, you'd just be solid yellow. Again, I'm going with the directional strokes in which the fur grows. I'm putting a little bit of soft shadow around the eyes where that dark strip is on each side. And I'm adding stripy strokes where the fur grows across the ears and the forehead by using the edge of the bristle brush. I'm going into those areas where I see the darkest darks. And even though this is brown, a little bit on the eyes, a little bit on the nose, but we're going to use a black in a little bit for those. But before we do that, I want to use another color of brown. This one is raw sienna, and it's a redder brown. I'm adding it to a lot of the same areas where I used the dark brown to give some variation. You never really want to just use one shade, one color. Just looking at my photo reference and trying to pick out those areas of dark and light. And now I'm going to switch brushes. I want to do my background. Normally I do my background first. For whatever reason, I started right off with the subject. It's not going to matter to me in this case, though, that the subject is probably going to bleed as I do the background. It is going to bleed because I'm not going to be really careful not to touch the edges. And that's going to give this blue and white, which is cerulean blue, and again the zinc mixing white, it's going to give it a chance to mellow and get a little bit brownish, a little bit softer looking and more realistic looking in terms of not just being a clean, clear blue. So I'm covering it with, covering the background with that mix of blue and white, which again I did not mix on the palette, I'm mixing it on the canvas. And now when I get down to the brown and it spreads into it, I'm taking advantage of that by creating shadows and a softness, a blending, and even going in and blending with what I have on my brush now that has some of the blue on it. Now I'm going to switch brushes. This is a small brush that I'm going to use for my black. I want the palette knife and 3 colors in order to create this black. They are French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and again the burnt umber. Those 3 colors create a nice vibrant black rather than black from the tube. I have learned from my mentor, which was Amy Harvey. She taught me never to use just black out of a tube because it's not as vibrant. We want our colors to be a mix of a lot of different colors, even when that color is black. And black, of course, is all 3 colors. All of our neutrals are all of our primary colors mixed together in some portion or another. And with black, you don't use much yellow. Just whatever little bit of yellow is in that brown is all the yellow there is, but that's what keeps it from being purple. So I use the brown, the blue, and the red, and I get a really beautiful dark inky black. And with this small brush, I can get detail for the eyes, the nose, and the little bit of mouth there that's going to show as black. I'm going to just work with those shapes, remembering that his head is tilted a little bit, so I want to make sure that, that was a blue, showing that I put a little more blue in for the nose, because it's a gray, it's not a brown, and so I want to shift it toward the cooler neutral. Anyway, I was saying I want to make sure the eyes and the nose and the mouth reflect the fact that his head is tilting a little bit, which is part of what gives him so much charm. Now I'm taking a plain dry brush. This one is an angle brush. It's my favorite brush is an angle brush. And this is not, this and the previous brush are not bristle brushes. They are more like the type that you use, a nylon type that you use with acrylic paints normally. They have more spring and they create a more smooth look. So no longer am I going for the impasto 3D rough texturized look. I'm going for a very smooth look. Of course, I want glassy eyes and a nice smooth nose. And I'll be working on those more as we get into the detail phase of this painting. But right now I'm using that dry brush just to go in and blend some areas where I see that my strokes need blending. Now the fan brush will further go in for some detail. I have a variety of fan brushes of different sizes and shapes, but the one I'm looking for, and I'm poking the tops of them to find out which one will be most like a bristle brush but still be very fine. And that will be this one. This is what I've chosen to use because it's stiff enough to show what I want, which is little whisker marks on the top of Fergus's nose. And yet it's soft enough that I can also use it all over Fergus to just blend and soften some of the strokes. I've been doing wet on wet, and now I'm going to let the painting dry so that my next phase will retain those texture marks that were created by the impasto technique, and also so that when I go in to do a color on top of another color that normally would just blur and blend together, it won't happen because the bottom coat will be dry. I'll get nice fresh marks and be able to work with the painting. There's only so much I can do wet on wet, and now I'm going to wait for the drying process and go back in and do wet on dry.